But we will continue now with the second panel. And the second panel will be about digitalization and its implications to cybersecurity. And we will elaborate here a little bit on the experience of the last year and a half in COVID-19 circumstances, where globally, absolutely every second country is driving in a direction of digitalization. And in parallel, also a long list of initiatives has started with capacity building in third countries with the same effort in digitalization. How this will fit in to the cybersecurity domain, and whether cybersecurity is still also taken into account with these initiatives, that's the focus of this panel. But before starting with the panel and introducing the panelists, I have the honor of welcoming here my dear friend, a very good colleague from good old times from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Estonia, and the rising star in DigiNear, Mr. Tanel Tang, who is a member of support group for Ukraine. He is responsible for coordinating the policy dialogue with Ukraine in the areas of digital transformation, e-government, and cybersecurity, and designing policy actions in these areas. As of September this year, Tanel is in parallel thematic and program lead on cyber for the whole Eastern Partnership region. And just for your interest, Tanel will probably elaborate on that as well, but the investments on the digitalization area in Ukraine are probably one of the biggest that we have seen in the area, and probably also a good pilot to follow up and a good example for lessons learned. But please, I would be happy to invite on here Mr. Tanel Tang, who would provide a little scene setter on the supporting digital transformation in Eastern Partnership case study of Ukraine.
Thanks a lot, Uku, for this introduction, and happy to be here and speak a bit about Ukraine. Ukraine is, for many reasons, a special country. It is the biggest Eastern Partnership country of the European Union. It is a country with tremendous digital potential. It is also a country where there is an active military conflict, which also includes hybrid attacks such as cyber attacks and disinformation attacks. I should also say that Ukraine is a country which is by far the biggest recipient of the EU bilateral support in digital transformation and cyber resilience. 3 points, 3 lessons learned, what we have had during the last few years in working together with Ukraine, which also can be extended to other Eastern Partnership countries and possibly to the rest of the world. First, very important thing to know about Ukraine is that despite of the tremendous cyber threat challenge to the country, Ukraine has embraced digital transformation as much as it is possible. Ukraine has launched a digital platform of services, digital services. They are available on mobile telephone. Every citizen can access them just very simply. And very important also to add that in a very short period of time, the number of users of this DIA application, of DIA platform, has risen to 7 million people, almost in one and a half a year to 7 million people. This would have never happened without government also working on ensuring the trust in this system and ensuring the cybersecurity of the government registers and interoperability. A second point, very important for us, is the institutional capacity on the partner country side. I could speak a lot on this and in very general terms, but essentially what it means to us is that there is an agent of change on the side of Ukrainian government who pushes the agenda through different ministries, through different agencies, and at the same time also pays attention not only to the front office of the digital transformation and electronic services, but also the back office, which includes protection of privacy and cyber security. Third element, I think it was a very interesting discussion before on the alignment with the EU standards and legislation. This is a very important aspect for us as well with Ukraine. Ukraine is definitely a like-minded country. It is a country that wishes to be one day a member of the European Union, and it is also a country which has a very comprehensive legal framework in approximating with the EU standards and legislation, the association agreement. And basically, from the EU side, we work in implementing this agreement. This includes a rather extensive digital agenda, but it also includes the EU cybersecurity acquis, and particularly the Network Information Security Directive of the EU. Now, after having said this, absolutely clear that the EU can do more and can do better in Ukraine, as it can do also in other Eastern Partnership countries and globally as well. I think a couple of interesting remarks were made earlier in the panel about the need to look into working in the defense sector. I think that the EU has very interesting possibilities in this regard with the European Peace Facility. I think a second element is also looking into how to put our EU-Ukraine cybersecurity dialogue more into practice. Ukraine and EU launched the cybersecurity dialogue this summer, and now we are basically working how to fill this with substance and really helping the practitioners on the ground to support this work. I think also what we need to look into is how to merge private sector into all those initiatives that we do. And maybe a final point, I know that this event is about capacity building, but I think that in countries as large as Ukraine and countries that are very fast developing in this area, we also need to look into how to link this with infrastructure development and also purchasing the equipment for the relevant authorities. Thanks a lot for the opportunity, and happy to discuss those things further.
Thank you very much, Tanel, and thank you for your time, and good luck with the efforts with Ukraine and also with the other Eastern Partnership countries. I think this was quite a good introductory story about, some success stories which are already happening on the ground. So we will continue now with the panel on global drive for digitalization, a challenge for cybersecurity. And I have an honor here to welcome in this panel very distinguished guests from different parts of the world. We have Miss Kerry-Ann Barrett from US, who is the cybersecurity policy specialist at the cybersecurity program at the Organization of American States. We have here with us Mr. Joe de Muynck, who is the head of operational cooperation unit of the EU Agency for Cybersecurity, ENISA. We also have with us Mr. Bertrand Lathoud, who is the head of the Cybersecurity Competence Center, C3 of Luxembourg, a recently created Department of Security made in .lu, the agency of the Ministry of Economy in charge of the security of the economy and municipalities, cybersecurity of the economy and municipalities. And last but not least, we have here also Mr. Khan Sahin, who is an international policy advisor with a focus on technology and cyber issues. He was technology fellow at the policy planning unit in Germany's Federal Foreign Office. So happy to welcome you all here. And we will kick off with the second panel now. Yes, indeed. I mean, good to have you here, gentlemen. And good morning, Kerry-Ann. I hope you have had a quick coffee in before joining us. It must be around 6 o'clock there in the US. And also, good morning or good afternoon to Bertrand in Luxembourg. So good to have you with us. So maybe to kick off with the discussion, a common question. I mean, what is the impact of COVID-19 to capacity building projects? Maybe, I mean, let's immediately start from US. I mean, so to keep you awake, Kerry-Ann, I mean, maybe you could elaborate a little further. I mean, how the COVID-19 has kind of impacted OAS and your activities, and how what is the impact to cybersecurity capacity building projects? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Uki, for the opportunity, and thank you to CyberNet for inviting the OAS. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that we had to pivot. We had to think about reassessing how capacity building can be received. And we also had to think about what truly is capacity building. Is it just having persons in a conference room? Is it really giving them the tools they need at the time? Recognizing that many of our member states were actually grappling with adapting and going online without, like, sooner than they expected. The other two things that COVID-19 did for us with capacity building was recognizing that a lot of our tools could be more accessible to persons online. So we're able to connect the issues of connectivity, accessibility, and information sharing by allowing a lot of our capacity buildings to be available both virtually, recognizing that when travel was available again, we could at least ensure that we could do it in person again. And I think the last thing I'd want to throw in is that for capacity building, we also had to recognize that things would take longer, where you'd be able to have all the policymakers in a room and have a decision instantly, coordinating time differences, schedules, having persons logged in on a computer for 4 hours, 5 hours. It wasn't possible. So I think the short answer would be that pivoting and being flexible and agile were some of the key lessons that we learned.
Okay, thank you for that, Kerry-Ann. I mean, you were serving as a cert BE earlier. You know what it means to drive a digital project and what kind of risks it involves for cybersecurity. How do you see that? I mean, the current situation where, I mean, all the countries globally are running for digitalization. Do they pay adequate attention also to cybersecurity risks, or is this recognized as a kind of a, or should we do more on that regard?
Well, I think that cybersecurity is becoming really a cross-sector kind of topic. So you really see that, I think, across different sectors that cybersecurity is really this kind of building block. And I think that's the way it should be. Nevertheless, I think we need to pay more attention to cybersecurity in general. And I would like to make the analogy perhaps with the aviation sector and the way that they deal with safety in a very holistic manner. And I think we need to do that also when it comes to cybersecurity. Basically, when you step up, when you board an airplane, it's very normal that you have all these procedures and so on. And it's also very logical that all the procedures when it comes to the airplanes and the airports and so on are very safe. And I think we need to have the same kind of approach when it comes to cybersecurity.
Yes, indeed. I mean, there seems to be a kind of a constant controversy, I mean, between the efforts on design and then the cybersecurity elements in order to, I mean, to build something which would be very useful for a user. I mean, in many occasions, I mean, the cybersecurity aspects are maybe not reflected properly, because I mean it's in the process of I mean you need to invest and you deliver very quickly, and then you are running on time. And I know from the past, from my experience, that I mean for many e-governance related solutions, there was always this time pressure, and then these questions suddenly started to emerge. I mean, why do we have to do the security tests again? Why we can't go live now? I mean, why can't we move ahead like that? So maybe Bertrand, how do you see this from Luxembourg? I mean, you've been running the center now for some time, and also, I mean, the last few year and a half have been very interesting in times of digitalization, or from the point of view of digitalization. I mean, how do you see what is the impact to cybersecurity?
I think you're touching one of the key points, which is user experience. And Joe was also highlighting it. When we go to an airport, we expect several checks. Whereas in the digital domain, it's very often considered as a problem, as friction. And I think it comes from the way we started digitalization. In order to make these tools more appealing, I think, because they had to be introduced in existing workflows, a huge focus was made on ease of use, and that's perfectly understandable. The problem is that sometimes ease of use is contradicting some of the security checks that have to be performed. And that's at this point that very often we have to do some arbitrage, and most of the time they are not in favor of security. But that was the usual approach. What we have seen with the COVID situation and the, I would say, accelerated digitalization it forced us into, is that there were also very significant issues with some of the tools that were used. Everyone, I think, remembers some of the, for instance, cabinet meetings from the UK government, which were kind of surprisingly open. These kind of things have helped to bring the security matter upper in the awareness of the decision makers, and so it's easier now to get more balanced arbitrage where security is taken in consideration more in this airline type of approach, where it's mandatory because otherwise it leads to not taking it into account leads to disaster. So I think we are on the right track right now.
Certainly there is a context, I mean, which is driving in a more direction of more digitalization. Khan, I mean, going more practical, we see projects coming from different entities and different actors in third countries. Some are about digitalization, some, as EU CyberNet is focusing, are more about cybersecurity capacity building. How to build bridges between these different initiatives and how to ensure that there will be a complementarity. I mean, you are a practitioner on the ground, you know the challenges. I mean, how do you see the picture?
I mean, more digital adoption lead to cybersecurity risks, of course, and of course an expansion of the attack surface. And actually, if you're trying to digitalize your business operations, your administrations, this should actually go ideally hand in hand with also strengthening your cyber capabilities and cyber resilience and cyber posture. If I take the example of the European Union, if I take a kind of a big picture, then we can see that the European Union has tried to combine basically both approaches. I mean, we have a lot of strategic proposals and initiatives which aimed at, for instance, increasing its technological competitiveness, but also when it comes to digital regulation, Digital Compass 2030, AI legislative proposal, and so on. But on the other hand, also, this was accompanied by cybersecurity initiatives like the establishment of a joint cyber unit and a cybersecurity strategy. Nevertheless, now from my own experience as a cyber risk business consultant, I know that it is at times quite hard to persuade stakeholders from the private sector and the public sector to persuade them that it is not only sufficient to digitalize the operations and administrations and so on, but also at the same time invest in cybersecurity. But I personally think also that COVID-19 has changed that a little bit, because at the very beginning of the pandemic, we could see that we had a huge surge of cybersecurity attacks, and this has led to a different perspective, of course. And I also think, now I'm coming back to the European Union, that the European Union has an advantage by promoting this kind of twofold approach, because it has shown that on the one hand, in the last 1-2 years, it has launched a lot of initiatives towards digitalization, but on the other hand, also launched a lot of initiatives towards cyber resilience and increasing cyber posture.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. I mean, I just as a follow-up here, I mean, to Kerry-Ann, Organization of American States has been engaged actively to cyber capacity building activities for some time. I mean, how do you see that, what do the donor countries expect from capacity building projects, and how should we meet their expectations, or how to really bring some change on the ground? What is your experience on that?
I think it's important, to actually think about the donor community from the sense that it has to be driven from something. So whether it be a country that's actually a donor country, it would have a cybersecurity strategy that would be outward facing for the international community and capacity building, recognizing that the one cyberspace that we do share right now, it's like everyone's responsibility, because if one aspect of us or any partner we have is weak, then our own resilience becomes a little bit more weakened. So the donor community, I think, are expecting to see more uptake from countries who are developing in the area of cybersecurity to become more independent, but at least more, I think, driven and proactive in their cybersecurity response. So one of the things that we have looked at is how can we maximize resources as the OAS, not just to think about just one project, but to think about it as a holistic journey for our member state to go from a lower capacity to a more higher capacity, ensuring that we also meet our member states' own goals, because as you guys have been speaking about, digitization, especially in the wake of COVID, is something that everyone has been doing, and every sovereign nation has its own outlook for its country and where it wants to be in 5 years. So the OAS has tried really hard to match the donor community's views, the member states' sovereignty, and where they want to go, recognizing that cyber resilience requires meeting both objectives.
Follow-up, I mean, are you also looking for complementarity with what Europe is doing? And perhaps how do you see the role of CyberNet, EU CyberNet?
So I'm happy you asked that. For us, it's true cooperation. I think what we were able to do initially when Cyber for Dev started and then CyberNet came about was to actually look at how can we build stronger networks cross-regionally, recognizing that that cross-regional cooperation actually builds on cybersecurity capacity building. The CyberNet relationship for us has been a true partnership, because we've been able to leverage on funding that we have and then do digitized capacity across the region. So for us, CyberNet has been one that allowed us to actually think about true capacity building by offering services that doesn't just require someone flying in, but they've actually supported us so far with national cybersecurity strategies, risk assessment, and then even training and capacity in country, both virtually and in person.
That's very good to know, because that's exactly what we learned also from the first panel, that Europe is also seeking for partnerships and trying to build this kind of a global community on cybersecurity capacity building, because it's a global challenge. I mean, affecting each and every country and having an implications to all of us. Just a kind reminder to all of you also in the audience that your active engagement is very warmly welcome. You can log in to the worksup.com/EU CyberNet and ask questions. And also there is a tiny task for you, I mean, about different challenges that are related to cyber capacity building projects. So feel free to answer a few questions there. You are now working for ENISA. ENISA is the kind of a center of excellence for cybersecurity expertise in Europe. From your personal point of view, you have a long track record also as a head of CERT. What do the third countries really need? What kind of assistance we should offer? What is the expertise that they are lacking at?
I think that's very different from country to country, and even in Europe, the capabilities within the different member states are really very varied. So for us, I think if you look at the agency, our main focus obviously is the European Union, right? And I think one of the previous speakers also mentioned the lack of, not the lack of expertise, but the lack of resources. And so we also only have limited resources to provide capacity building activities. And so for us, it's really a matter of basically leveraging, for example, on CyberNet, to use our kind of trainings, exercises, and material that we produce, that we can leverage that to also neighboring countries, third countries, and so on. But I think that from my point of view, I have a good view and knowledge about what is lacking in the EU, but I don't necessarily have that same visibility on a global scale. So when it comes to third countries and so on, I think there we need to work together with External Action Service, DGNIR, but also projects like your CyberNet and so on to really get that ground kind of feeling.
But more or less the same question to you, Khan. How do you see, the needs of third countries? Okay, I understand that these are rather different depending on their maturity level, but your experience and what EU has to offer? What is this kind of our promising package that we could bring to the countries?
I think the most promising package that we could offer would be a very comprehensive package, because as we could see in a previous presentation, when it comes to cyber capacity building, it has a lot of dimension. It has a strategic dimension, a technical dimension, an organizational dimension. And I think what EU CyberNet is doing right now is it is going in the right direction by offering kind of a broad portfolio. But in a previous panel, there was also something which was mentioned, I think, which is of prime importance. It is we have to conduct more knowledge-based activities. We have to provide more evidence-based research, which can help us to really identify what are the gaps country by country. And I think this is still lacking, and I think we have to put much more efforts in that.
But how to get there? Who should do the mapping? What's your view on
of course, we have already, for instance, research institutes which are very much engaged in that, but we need more of that. And we have not only, I think, provide money and finances to cyber capacity building project per se, but also, for instance, to think tanks and research institutes so that they can do this mapping, they can do this research. And based on that, we can have better designed, more sustainable cyber capacity building projects.
Bertrand, you have a very good experience on different projects on the ground. What is your feeling? Do we have a good understanding on the practical needs on the ground, and what could be done better, perhaps, to improve that mapping and understanding?
So I think we have a kind of generic understanding, and as Joe was saying, we understand perfectly what's going on inside the EU. There is still some progress to be made, but that's kind of okay. Now, with regards to projects outside the EU, I will be extremely cautious to not rely only on EU resources, be they administrative or think tanks, as Khan was explaining. I would also like to be sure that part of each project is spending some time on the ground with the people on the ground who are going to benefit from the project. That's extremely important. From several different projects on different continents, I observed that there is no twice the same type of needs. And every time we had to adapt to the specific requests that were coming from the ground, and that's extremely important. Otherwise, the risk is to kind of build a maladjusted capacity, and then at the end, the union will have spent resources, and the receiving part will not have its need exactly fulfilled, and so it's not going to be satisfying for both parts. So I think it's really important also to find a way to really listen to the needs as they are expressed by the people who are going to use this capacity or benefit from this new capacity.
This comprehensiveness was mentioned several times. Kerry-Ann, I mean, how do you see this from in the region where Organization of American States is operating? Do you see that there is a clear-cut demand for some specific expertise, or do you see that this is still kind of a variety of experts that are needed? And how do you cope with this challenge? I mean, where do you find these experts?
I think what Bertrand said was spot on, because being on the ground is critical to understand those needs. Just to throw two things, we've been doing cyber capacity building for over 15 years. And for us, as much as the region has advanced, you'll always find that there's still more needed because of the turnaround of either staff. As was said by one of the other speakers, resources is always something that's constant, whether they're leaving the public sector to go to the private sector. And the OAS has partnered with several organizations to ensure that one, for example, with IDB and Oxford, we've implemented the CMM, which is the cyber capability model, and checking to see what is the landscape on the ground. Our member states are very involved in doing that assessment. And we have also recognized that we ask our member states what they need, but being the OAS in the region and being a long-standing partner for our member states, we also have some ground knowledge. So what we've been able to do is, for example, with the GFCE, the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, for them, we were naturally the partners to do and be the GFCE America's hub. With CyberNet, it was similarly when CyberNet established itself. One of the things that we did, I think, was we met with them. We even met with Impacto. We've met with Cyber for Dev, recognizing that even as the OAS, we don't have all the resources, and the expertise can be found across the globe because of what cyber capability is generally. So I think what Bertrand said was spot on, because the day-to-day reality for each member state is unique to them. Each day the challenges will be different for them, and figuring out what skill sets they need is going to be a long-term growing experience as technology changes.
Sure. ENISA has been actively engaged on developing capabilities in Europe, and different member states are really in different level when it comes to their maturity and understanding of cybersecurity. If you are speaking about capacity building in EU, what is the kind of lessons learned from here? I mean, what do you need in order to succeed in a specific member state? What are these kind of preconditions that need to be met in order to be successful with the development of capabilities?
I think it goes hand in hand with what already was said. So when we do projects and capacity building projects, we do that really together and for the stakeholders. So for the stakeholders, but also together with the stakeholders. So basically, we involve them really from the very beginning, and that indeed leads to ownership. So I think that's really key to make sure that what you do in terms of capacity building is actually of added value also for the stakeholders that are relevant.
Mm-hmm. Khan, how do you see that? I mean, if we speak about different capacity building projects in third countries and how to engage this kind of ownership there? I mean, how to ensure that, for example, you have a right level of political support for your actions and you would be not left alone when you go to a third country?
I mean, this is, of course, always a kind of a challenge, but I think the way is really to build trust and really to show the partners that it is incredibly important to have these cyber capabilities. And of course, this is always kind of tricky. But I think what we need is, of course, a constant dialogue. And a constant dialogue, prior to that, we need really to show also to third countries that the European Union has started now that cyber capacity building has kind of a huge strategic importance. And by giving that strategic importance or giving that overall importance to cyber capacity building, of course, third countries can see that it is for the European Union now is such an important tool, and that the European Union is starting to engage much more with third countries in terms of this. And I think here we have already talked about the EU cybersecurity strategy, which was published last December, that the European Union has now really developed new tools, the Cyber Capacity Building Board, for instance, and with that tool, I think we can have a new venue to better engage with third countries. But I also think that EU CyberNet can play a role here.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, I also believe that, CyberNet has a kind of, it is a good tool, building these partnerships and also creating the sense of ownership. I have one question from the audience which I have received through the workshop. It's maybe for you, Bertrand, for replying. It's about the same question which we started with. That there are a lot of efforts with digitalization, also a lot of efforts from EU, different projects. There was one that was mentioned by Tanel earlier in his scene setter speech. How do you see, should maybe cybersecurity become kind of always a kind of a mandatory element of these digitalization projects, or it's wise to keep these two issues separately and continue in a way that we have digitalization initiatives and we have initiatives for cybersecurity capacity building? What is your inner feeling and experience?
So I will tend to push as much cybersecurity as possible into digitalization projects. I will not go maybe too far and make it completely mandatory, but I will definitely, for instance, add some questionnaire, like maturity questionnaire in templates, if there are any type of such documents that could be available, so that the persons in charge of digitalization start to kind of think it's like planting seeds in a not too forceful way, and so that they can start to see, to project themselves into this matter of cybersecurity. That will avoid obviously a lot of trouble, which comes usually when cybersecurity is overlooked and there are incidents after the implementation of digitalization. And so I would go this way. It's another way of doing awareness. So I will constantly invest into awareness campaigns around cybersecurity. And I would also, if possible, provide tools still to improve the maturity of a digitalization project. And still, it's around simple assessments. We are doing it, by the way, in one of our projects in Africa, and we get a lot of very positive feedback because it makes cybersecurity a little bit less of a constraint. It's something they have time to basically factor into their projects if it was not initially.
Yes, thanks, Bertrand. I think this idea of having a kind of a checklist next to each and every digitalization project sounds quite practical and maybe very useful. But you wanted to have a follow-up on that.
Yeah, no, just to basically complement and saying that the real aim should be security and privacy by design. And if you want to achieve that, then by definition, cybersecurity needs to be a building block for this digitalization. And I think if you don't do that, then you come back to what you basically started this whole panel with, that cybersecurity in the past especially was more like an afterthought, and it should be the thought and a real goal in the beginning of digitalization.
Absolutely, I fully agree with that. And this comes down to this little controversy that we were discussing earlier about this user experience versus cybersecurity, which is, I mean, a bit of a fight between designers and cybersecurity experts. But it also is a bit linked also to the way that different projects have been designed. I mean, that in some circumstances there is a huge ambition to go forward with the digitalization efforts in a country X. But I mean, this goes maybe with the price of cybersecurity. But it would be very good. I mean, this cybersecurity element could be more and more systematically reflected on the development of different projects. Kerry-Ann, still coming back to the old issue, I mean, about the complementarity and cooperation. What is your feeling? I mean, there are many actors internationally operating capacity building projects. How to seek synergies there, and are we in competition with each other? And is this competition maybe beneficial? I mean, like in normal market situation, the best will win, or the best team will win. But how do you see? I mean, this kind of interaction there.
It's funny that you asked that, because in January of this year, we actually took the time to reach out to every single partner. Can you imagine doing virtual meetings in a lot of time zones, even in Singapore, capacity center, trying to figure out what each person wanted to do in the region? I wouldn't call it competition. You'd hear us use a lot, or me use a lot going forward, true cooperation, because we believe that every single entity that's doing capacity building has a motive. And I always believe in figuring out what the motive is and matching that with the need that's in the region, because there's not enough funds. And at the end of the day, if we can do complementarity, if we can leverage on funding and capacity availability from entities such as CyberNet, it can only do well for the globe, not just our region, but all the other regions that need capacity building. So I think it's important to not see each other as competitors. And that's the mindset I think we're working towards in 2022, especially. It's trying to recognize what each player needs to achieve, because everyone has a mandate. The OAS has a mandate since 2004 on capacity building. The EU has one. What are the mandates of the donor community? What are the mandates of the development community? I think Bertrand spoke earlier about doing it as a part of the development of digitization, but recognizing that the risk factors for each is important, whether it be that a donor nation is investing in digitization, the risk is real, so a cyber impact assessment has to be done. So I think the short answer would be to you that it's really important to think about all donors and implementers as having a need. And the regional organizations such as us, I mean, we play a role in actually bringing those players together. Coincidentally, on November 9th, we're actually doing a donors and implementers forum to discuss just this. What's driving your capacity building initiatives, and how can we as the OAS actually help you to collaborate to ensure that we're building on the capacity for long-term sustainability? So I hope that helps.
Yes, indeed. Well, more or less same question to you, Khan. I mean, you were working earlier also in the Federal Foreign Office of Germany. So how do you see this kind of cooperation at the international level? I mean, were you very busy with different actors from different international bodies who were doing the same tasks in similar regions, or do you see that there is more growing complementarity over the years?
I mean, I can say that, of course, I can see some kind of growing complementarity, but I still think that, to be very honest, that there is still the risk of duplications, and duplications of cybersecurity or cyber capacity building projects is still a problem when it comes to that field. For instance, it was quite interesting to read in the recent very good study by the EU ISS when it comes to the case of Africa, when they found out that actually there's a very small number of African countries which are receiving disproportionate number of cyber capacity building projects, and there are other African countries which are totally overlooked. And this is something which is, of course, quite problematic. And I think here also it is very important that each donor, each project owner has to ask itself whether this proposed project that they are designing and that they're planning, is that really helpful? Mm-hmm. And I think also that what we did also in the Foreign Office, that we did beforehand, we did really our research and look, okay, is that a project that will help this specific country? Is that really something that this country or this region need? And I think that this is also the task of each donor.
Yes, indeed. We'll receive a few questions also from the audience here. I will maybe take advantage and ask from your, what would it mean in very practical terms to include security by design in a digitalization project? Is a question that we have received. I mean, we learned what Bertrand recommended. I mean, that would be good to have some sort of a checklist, but do you have some other ideas? I mean, how this could be achieved? If we have a digitalization project, I mean, how to include this security by design to the project?
Well, it very much depends on what kind of project, of course, but so that's why it's also difficult to really pinpoint it down to something very specific. But I think just whenever you have a project, there should be, on digitalization, there should be like the beginning that cybersecurity is mandatory for this project, right? So if it's a project on the infrastructure, I think one of the main goals and KPIs of the project should be that the infrastructure in the end is secure, and so really to add this kind of angle to the project.
Is this? I mean, this is a political question, but I mean, is this a place where EU should come up with its own preferences? For example, for 5G, I mean, there is a clear-cut understanding now how to move forward, and also an understanding that some specific providers for infrastructure should be excluded just for security considerations. How do you see that?
Difficult question. Perhaps you can ask it first to someone else and let me reflect a little bit. Apologies.
All right. But meanwhile, we have received a little comment also from WorksUp. It's basically, I support EU initiatives in Asia. We need to realize that many countries in Asia are higher in the ITU Global Cybersecurity Index than EU member states, which is true. We need to see our engagements on cybersecurity and cyber diplomacy as a partnership. We can learn from other countries as well as share our knowledge. Cormac Callanan Esiva. So thanks for this comment. I take that this is pretty much in line with what Kerry-Ann was saying earlier about the partnerships and the need to develop our understanding there and our cooperation. Well, maybe, Khan, coming back to this building bridges and bringing down silos, my understanding of the current state of play is that there are many actors on the field, and there are, in some circumstances, also kind of a competition for the funding, which might be quite good. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing if it's a healthy competition. There is a kind of a mixed understanding on the situation on the ground and the capacity gaps. How do you see the role of EU CyberNet here? I mean, in helping different partners and building these bridges?
I mean, when it comes, of course, to EU CyberNet, I have to say that I'm a little bit biased since I was a member of the advisory board on behalf of the German Federal Foreign Office. But I think here it will be very important that EU CyberNet will become kind of a go-to place of cyber capacity building when it comes to EU-wide projects. And I think that EU CyberNet has, of course, a very important role in building these bridges and really also, on the one hand, showing potential third countries what EU member states are capable of doing. But I also think, maybe coming to your first question concerning can the EU maybe also promote maybe certain values. I understood it in that direction when it comes to 5G. I know that this is a little bit controversial, but and first and foremost, the most important thing is, of course, to see what are the needs of these countries. But at the same time, I also think that it is quite important that the European Union, the member states, understand cyber capacity building, maybe also as a kind of a strategic tool to fulfill foreign policy goals, to be very, very frank. And also to understand that cyber capacity building, external cyber capacity building, can also strengthen Europe's so-called digital sovereignty. Because for me, digital sovereignty is not only increasing our own technological competitiveness, but it also means strategic engagement globally with third countries, and their cyber capacity building can be a very, very important building block.
That was exactly my question, indeed. I mean, are we promoting our values also with these capacity building projects? And if yes, I mean, should be more vocal also on different technological solutions there. I mean, Kerry-Ann, how about you? I mean, how about the Organization of American States? I mean, is this a kind of prerogative for you as well, that you are promoting some values with the capacity building projects that you have, or you have a more technical approach and you simply seek to help the countries who are in need with the respective technological help, or you have a bit of a more political context behind your actions?
I think it's important to probably frame how the OAS is set up. It is a regional political body. So the mandates given to the cybersecurity program will be driven by all 34 member states, each of which have an equal vote. But from the cybersecurity program perspective, we've been very, very focused on the technical. We believe in policy development, ensuring that our member states think about a policy from the global perspective and what some of the global norms are. We look at it from the technical, from CSIRT's development to technical training for law enforcement. And we also look at it from just broad research by ensuring that our member states has all the information. So I guess you could say we're kind of, with the capacity aspect of it, maybe capacity neutral, but in terms of a politically neutral approach. But we try to make sure that our member states get the best of what's there, which is what these partnerships have been very useful to us, because when the needs are expressed to us, we've been able to truly sit down with our partners and say to them, these are the needs, and they try to source the needs. And we always emphasize the need for not pushing specific products, but looking at the specific tools and skill sets that are needed to respond to the incidents.
That is a very clear answer. I mean, maybe the same question to you, Bertrand, as well. I mean, should EU seek for this very dangerous domain of playing with the promoting the strategic autonomy and some specific technologies, or should the capacity building actions from the EU side remain a bit more neutral, similarly to OAS and their activities? I mean, what is your inner feeling? I mean, are we...
So I think I would err on Kerry-Ann's side by stating that technology in itself is kind of neutral, and if we answer to technological requirements, we probably can more or less stay neutral. However, technology is used in a context. It's used answering to policies. And we see that Europe can have an influence. To which extent it's a strong influence, I can't state, but I have two examples in mind. The first is obviously GDPR, which triggered a global discussion around privacy, and a lot of countries have actually implemented all or parts of this framework. So involuntarily, maybe, or not. I don't know what was in the mind of the leaders who pushed this. But point is, Europe can have a global influence on how technology is implemented through this type of things. And more specifically on security, we can think also of the Budapest Convention, which is not directly EU tool, but which also triggered a lot of discussions around values that go along with fighting cybercrime. And this was so clear that, as you know, some of your neighboring countries were very adamant to block this convention. So I think technology in itself is neutral, but it triggers a policy debate because it will have to be implemented in one way or the other. And the last thing is, it's difficult to talk about security and privacy by design without taking into account values and principles, because privacy in particular is riddled with this type of issues. I mean, the way privacy is understood depends a lot on, I would say, political views. And therefore, if the countries that are being supported adhere or are close to the European vision of privacy, the way they are going to design their system is going to reinforce these values. And therefore, that will in some way be strengthening the EU soft power, if I can say, at global level. So sorry for being long, but I think it's a difficult question. It will require a lot of diplomatic support, I think, to these projects. This is the kind of question that cannot be solved by the technical expert when they are on the ground. They are there to implement the technology, but they definitely need, I think, diplomatic support from the Union when they enter in this kind of gray zone-ish issues.
Indeed, thanks, Bertrand. I think that's my understanding as well. I mean, from the dialogue in the morning and also from earlier policy debates, that regardless to the fact that we will be neutral when it comes to technology, or at least to some extent, there are still some values behind the EU actions, and a framework that we have been promoting and where we have been like global pioneers is privacy, and GDPR, NIS, I mean, they are all relevant, standing blocks when it comes to also capacity building initiatives, because in the end of the day, if we go to another country exporting our experience, then this experience is based on something. And this legal framework has been developed in Europe and also reflects a bit our understanding and our values. So probably that's the case where EU will have to be firm on all its actions. But I understood that there is one question also from the audience, and then we will sum it up with a panel here, because we are slightly on over time as well. The gentleman on the back, please.
Hi, Maurice Campbell from Cyber4Dev. I'm not going to hold anyone back from their lunch, but I just wanted to make the point that perhaps, as well as digitalization as a challenge for cybersecurity, we do have an opportunity to look at the wider developmental impact of a good cybersecurity stance in a country. And I'm thinking particularly of the ability of countries to attract foreign direct investment. These wider development issues and fitting together what we're offering in terms of cyber capacity building with the wider development agenda in country is something that, in my experience, ministers are interested in. So we want not just to say, let's do this because you need it for a digitalized economy. What we want to be saying is there are multiple reasons for developing your cyber capacity, one of which, of course, is to support digitalization, but another is to support, for instance, the attraction of foreign direct investment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this valuable comment. I think we can all sign up to that. I mean, all four of us here. So thanks for that. And I would like to thank you all for attending this panel. We had a little poll running behind the scenes as well. So if this could be visualized, we were simply asking, what is the most hot topic of digitalization and cybersecurity, or most controversial hot topic of digitalization and cybersecurity? Apparently here, the audience seems to see that, artificial intelligence is having a very prominent role. I know that ENISA is working on that very closely to mitigate the risks and to address relevant risks. Also here, security by design was mentioned. 5G, to my surprise, does not seem to be a very in a very prominent position. I don't know. And big data is also relatively low or not so highly seen as a most controversial topic on this ground. All right, I would like to thank the panelists here. I think we had an interesting exchange. Kerry-Ann, to you, all the best and have a lovely morning. Thanks for waking up so early. Bertrand, also, I mean, have a lovely afternoon in Luxembourg. I hope the weather is nice. And gents here, I mean, was a pleasure and all the best. I think we had a good, I mean, we could conclude here that, I mean, cooperation between different actors globally is needed. Small competition doesn't harm. And values are essential when guiding some projects. And this should be the case also in the future. So thank you very much. A small applause to all the participants. From my side, thank you all for watching. We will continue after lunch break. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's supposed to be just an hour, so let me double check that. But in the meanwhile, have a look on the worksup.com/EU CyberNet. And check, I mean, there are 2 panels in the afternoon. One is going live from Berlin and one is going live from here, from Brussels. So it's up to you to choose which one you will prefer. Again, you can ask questions, you can answer to some tasks, and it will be very distinguished guests attending there, several ambassadors, and the focus will be on the cyber diplomacy. But thank you very much for being with us, and the lunch break starts now, and see you on time. Thank you. Bye.